Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on legal education during armed conflict. I will, without further ado, pass the floor to Shiran Reichenberg for opening remarks, and I will then be back with you with the first session.
Sigall. Hello and good morning, noon, or afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Shiran Reichenberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Hebrew University Legal Clinics in the Faculty of Law. And in the past 17 years, I'm also the legal clinician of the Youth at Risk Rights Legal Clinic. It is an honor for me to welcome you all to this important webinar on clinical legal education during armed conflicts. It's almost a year now since the October 7th war started. It's hard to say how much time has been in this horrible conflict. It's the hardest year I can remember in every aspect, personal, national, and of course regarding our webinar today, how can you teach and advocate for human rights when human rights are under constant attack? So today we gather to discuss not only the challenges, but also the opportunities that arise when clinical legal education meets the hard realities of war zones, conflicts, and humanitarian crisis. For us at the Clinical Legal Education Center at the Hebrew University, it took us a few days to get out of the shock we were all in after the war started, and we almost immediately started working on the aspects we as Clinical Legal Education Center could do. We approached our students and we initiated the Hamal, which is a hotline Facebook page to help access to justice for people from the south and north of Israel who were evacuated from their homes and needed different legal assistance. And afterwards, we also went to the hotels they were at and gave them assistance there. We also contacted the Hostage Family Forum and started representing them in front of different UN bodies and working groups. Both of these activities go on till today. But there was another significant challenge, our personal relationships with one another, and also with our students. This wasn't the first armed conflict in Israel that we dealt with, but this one was different, with its implication and impact. We as a clinical staff worked very hard and succeeded to maintain our friendships and collegial partnerships. Our next effort was with the students and our clients. Because in conflict settings, clinical legal education faces a variety of complex issues. One of the most significant challenges is working with mixed staff, mixed students, practitioners, and community members who may come from opposing sides of the conflict. It creates unique dynamics in the classroom where we must encourage collaboration and understanding among our students who may carry different aspects of trauma, resentments, fears, and biases. Navigating these tensions while maintaining the integrity of clinical legal education and providing meaningful legal services requires careful attention to the emotional, ethical, and political keystones of our work. So as we move forward today, I invite you all to reflect on the role of clinical legal education in these settings, not merely as an academic exercise, but as a profound responsibility. In the face of war and conflict, the work we do in clinical setting has the potential to shape the future of justice and peace. And this webinar is the first step of thinking how legal clinics can struggle the situation, what is our role in it, and how we can learn from other legal clinics around the world that are facing similar coping. Before we begin our first session, I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Sigall Horovitz, who initiated and is the engine and motivator of this event, and it wouldn't have happened without her. Dr. Rosenbaum from Minerva Center for the Rule of Law Under Extreme Conditions from Haifa University, who helped us to organize this event. Thank you all for your help and patience. I want to thank GAJE, Global Alliances for Justice Education, for their support in this event, the Fried-Gall Foundation for their ongoing support in our work, and the law faculty in the Hebrew University, and of course to all of the Clinical Legal Education Center team here for making this year a little more bearable. And before we start, I want to wish for the return of all the hostages and the end of this war. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussions ahead.
Thank you very much, Shiran, and a huge thanks also to you as the director of the clinics and all the colleagues in the clinics that are on board and have helped make this webinar take place. I just wanted to make like a few housekeeping comments for the benefit of the audience, and I will start with a warm invitation to open your cameras so we could all see and participate in this way. You will see that we have put you on mute, and you will not be able to unmute yourself. We will unmute you in case you have questions for the speakers. We would like you, when you think of a question while the speakers are speaking, to write that question in the chat function. Our host, Ido, will communicate with you in the chat function regarding your question. And once the session is ready to open the floor to your questions, Ido will invite individuals from the audience to pose their questions to the speakers. Try to target your question at a specific speaker if possible. So each session will have sort of a half of the session will be the speaker speaking, and the second half will be Q&A with the audience. We will have a short break after the first session and after the second session before the next session. I will go ahead and introduce the speakers of the first session. I just want to say that I'll introduce them by name and current affiliation only, while their full bios are available in the web page of this webinar. Our time is kind of short, so I prefer to be sort of succinct and to the point now. Our first speaker, I don't see him with the camera on. Maybe Bukola, you can turn on your camera. Our first speaker comes to us, well, actually, he's based in Uganda, but he is a Nigerian, and he has been running clinical legal education projects in Nigeria. And he will speak about his experience running clinical legal education programs in Nigeria. He's currently a professor of legal ethics and education, as well as the dean of the School of Law of the Kampala International University in Uganda. Our second speaker in this session will be Stephen Rosenbaum. Stephen is a Frank Newman Lecturer in Law at the University of California in Berkeley in the U.S. And Stephen has a very rich experience teaching clinical law and legal education in Afghanistan. And so he will speak about his experiences there. And the third speaker of this session is coming to us from Pakistan, and this is Arshad Nawaz Khan, who is Assistant Professor and Coordinator of Clinical Legal Education at the Quaid-i-Azam University in Pakistan. So Steve, a couple of minutes, please, if you could first give a background of the conflict and the current sort of iteration of the conflict in Afghanistan and the challenges it poses for legal education and legal clinical education, and then move on to talk about your experiences. I might cut you with a little follow-up question in the middle.
Yes, thank you, Sigall, Ido, and company. And I just want to join Shiran in asking for the safe return of the hostages and for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and immediate entry of humanitarian aid. The reason I didn't want to go first was because my situation, the Afghan situation is a little different. And I see Richard Grimes here, who's worked in Afghanistan. We worked together also in Myanmar, and I'm sure he'll have things to say about it. But it comes under the rubric of extreme conditions, and that it's not a nation that's in a state of war, but follows a very rocky history from Soviet occupation, control, well, British colonial period for many years before that, Soviet period, then bookended, if you will, and I think that literary metaphor is poorly placed, but bookended by a period of Taliban 1.0 and now, unfortunately, 2.0, with a 20-year period of blossoming sometimes with wilted flora through corruption, and everything wasn't perfect, but there was a blossoming period of reform and innovation in many areas and in development, and particularly in legal education, where I had the honor of working with a number of Afghan young students, law students, and also young faculty from the Sharia and the law faculties in Afghanistan. And it surprises many people to know that they're not all in Kabul. There's many, and the Sharia and law faculties overlap a lot in subject matter. That's a story in itself. But that brought me to when I was at University of Washington, worked with some clinical tutorials with those students. They then went back to start up, or in some cases continue with legal clinics they had in various cities, in Herat, in Mazar Sharif, in Kabul, and so forth. And then August 21, 2021, things came to an abrupt halt. And so, unlike other places where a lot of your speakers are here today, where they're continuing to work physically in countries which are in state of war or other states of conflict, extreme conditions, it was important at this point with Afghanistan that everything was shut down completely. There was no possibility at all of continuing education as we knew it. On the contrary. And the first goal that I had with many colleagues was to engage in scholar rescue, which has a pretty distinguished history going back to the Third Reich, rescuing Jewish professors from Germany and Austria and other places in occupied Europe. And so getting people out to protect them both because of their lives and their livelihood, and bring them into the diaspora to get positions. And so not only for their own safety, but to continue with scholarship and continue to have whatever growth there could be in the legal education field. These are mainly professors, in some cases some jurists and some lawyers. And then secondarily, I, through various outlets, there's a group called Classrooms Without Walls in Canada. There's the ALPA Academy in Exile, and the ALPA was formerly a group of Afghan legal scholars. I'll say a little bit more about that, but to basically continue whatever education was possible. And so something that I've spent time in and others is educating main target audience being women and girls, because we know from all reports that educational opportunities have been diminishing over time in the last 3 years, despite all the cosmetic BS, let's say, that's been put on by Taliban, sort of putting on this veneer of having changed. And so, to my surprise, these number of young women are enthusiastic. They have internet connectivity. They have either the approval or acquiescence of their families. They're doing this in their own homes. And I've done a couple of courses in human rights, and other colleagues have taught in other areas human rights norms that are actually of treaties that have not been terminated by Afghanistan, although far from being respected. But in any event,
can I ask just 1 second, because we're running out of time? I just wanted, maybe if you could talk about a specific example, because I think what's interesting is that you found a way to reach out to the students and continue teaching. I don't know if they still get credit for this in the university. Of course, that's another question.
Well,
yeah, but maybe you have a little example of where, they're trying to be still students at the university and get from you. I understand they're based in Afghanistan still, these students taking their risk, et cetera.
Yeah. So they're right. In some cases, they're seeking accreditation, particularly through the American University of Afghanistan, which is also doing courses. And ALPA, this organization, is also running some courses. In most cases, I think it may be a little pie in the sky. In some cases, these are women going on to the Asian University for Women in Bangladesh, pursue their education. Transcripts are in the process of being worked on. Some are looking for jobs. It's really, to me, it's still amazing that they have the kind of hope and ability and the fortitude to continue with this. So the future is very uncertain. And I'll just say one more word about examples, is that the Academy in Exile that ALPA is sponsoring is, again, trying to preserve an educational curriculum that one day, inshallah, will go back to Afghanistan, where the life will return after this dark phase is over.
And what about pressures that you faced maybe from external actors about sort of working in that environment, as opposed to, I don't know, boycotts and, all kinds of international pressures on the regime?
Yeah.
Did you get any of that?
Right. Well, again, it's surprising again to me because this is below the radar in many respects, that the regime has too many fish to fry, too much surveillance to engage in, so it's not been seen as any kind of threat as long as these women stay out of the public space. I think unlike other situations, which people will talk about here today, there's no pressure. On the contrary, I think people want to support as much as possible. There's no suggestion of any boycott because we're not collaborating any means whatsoever with the Sharia faculty, kicked out all the people who are Western trained, or the law faculty for that matter. So there's no collaboration with government forever. I've been in those situations before in Myanmar, but that's not what's going on here.
Okay, so so overcoming the challenge has basically been through taking the legal education to informal routes in a way, and
routes going around. And as you and I have discussed, Sigall, in some cases it's broader than the legal education itself, because again, if people are looking practically, who knows how long they'll be in this dark period. The legal education goes so far. So other kinds of things, English language skills, STEM classes are being taught and things of that sort. So it goes beyond the legal education. That's the main subject of this webinar.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's a really, really interesting insights and challenges you share with us from Afghanistan. I'd like to turn to the next speaker. I would like, yeah, we can go back to Bukola, who's joined us. That's great. So in terms of geography, we were going to talk about Pakistan now, but I think we'll venture all the way to Nigeria and come back to that region later. So we'll continue now with Bukola Akinola, who I already presented you before with your role currently as Dean in Kampala University. But I know you've done a lot of work in Nigeria in legal clinical education. You're still involved there and you are from there. And if you want to tell us a little bit about those experiences first, for those who don't know, a little bit of context about the conflict situation in the eastern part of Nigeria where you're teaching, just in a few words about the actual conflict, and then what kind of challenges does that conflict present to your attempts to deliver legal education and legal clinical education?
Okay, thank you very much, Sigall. Good morning, all. And it's nice connecting with you from Nigeria, where I am at the moment for my short break. Now, I was the legal clinic coordinator for the Nigerian Law School Enugu campus, Southeast Nigeria, before my deployment to the northern part of Nigeria. And as we all know, the Boko Haram insurgency was a major threat to us, especially in northeast Nigeria. And we have a campus of the law school at the northeastern part of Nigeria. And we have this challenge with our law clinic. We are faced with a lot of people in IDPs, internally displaced persons, across various locations in these IDPs. And there are a few cases of rape within the camp. Of course, we got our students to do the pre-information briefing. They have a particular checklist in which they take information from they interview these victims in the IDP camps displaced by insurgency caused by the Boko Haram terrorists and other bandits. Now, as a clinic, first and foremost, our movement was impaired.
Bukola, we're losing you. I don't know if everyone has the same experience, so we've lost you. So just to recap, Bukola, until he rejoins us. So basically his law clinic, it works in areas affected by Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast of Nigeria. And the students have been having to work in IDP camps with victims of Boko Haram. And in these IDP camps, they've been deposing victims and trying to see what kind of legal aid they need. And I guess one of the challenges he highlighted so far is the actual mobility, the possibility of actually mobilizing and going there.
Well, Sigall, in the meantime, I think Richard has a question, so maybe we'll give him a chance to ask it.
Perfect.
Steve, I know you've done a great deal of work and fantastic work in Afghanistan, and I wouldn't undermine what you've said, of course, in any way at all. All I would suggest to you is that the situation is more complex than obviously you could describe in a few moments. And I'm in regular contact with clinics in Afghanistan and colleagues there. And whilst they face difficulties without a shadow of a doubt, the Taliban are not anti-clinic. And the reason they're not anti-clinic is very simple. There is no other form of access to legal services for so many of the population. So clinics are encouraged, but there are rules about the participation in clinic from the educational side. And of course, women at the moment are severely restricted in any activity across the board, let alone in higher education. I would also just suggest to you, which was the bit I was going to put in the next bit of chat, that the situation also is complex because our view of what is bad in the world is not necessarily shared in every culture. And I don't take the point, Steve, that you raised, that we are in a dark period in terms of complete negativity. I think there is peace in Afghanistan, albeit at a price. And in the golden period, I think you referred to before the second Taliban occupation, there was a massive amount of violence. And I think the price that has been paid for peace is severe restriction. But those are the only points I was going to make, and I don't want to make contention out of that. I thought it was just useful providing a slightly fuller picture.
Steve, you want to take that on now? Because we've got Bukola back and improved connectivity. So Steve, why don't you just relate very briefly, and then we go to Bukola to finish his words. Yeah, Steve, go ahead briefly.
Richard, no, I really respect what you're saying. And I mean, I disagree with a lot of it, but I also understand that kind of conflict, which again, I've seen elsewhere. Yes, it's good to have some resources that are there. Yes, Taliban has brought peace. The trade-offs, I think, are, as in many instances, people are going to have different views on it. So it's kind of news to me what you're saying. You make a good point for where some assistance, some succor is better than none. Although in the end, I would have difficulty embracing that. But I respect you very much. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. So we got Bukola back with us from Nigeria. Go ahead and talk a little bit about your case.
Okay. So I was saying that despite all the effort we put into training our students on how to debrief victims of insurgency, we still have issues. We need to train them on confidentiality issues so that the victims in their various internally displaced camps, persons camp, will be able to open up. For instance, there are young girls that are victims of rape inside the camp, and they see that sexual abuse as the only means of getting their daily bread. The privileged take advantage of that to molest them, assault them before they could feed. Because once what the government is bringing and the NGO is bringing as aid, once it's exhausted, where do they look up to next? And like I said before, our clinical operations were hindered because of insecurity. You have to get signal from the military before you move to various camps because of the nature in which Boko Haram operates by way of ambush. And the communities too are not that friendly. Some of them give information to these terrorists. And these are issues in the public domain. So it hinders us a lot, to the extent that even students who will choose the Nigerian Law School campus, we avoid campuses like Yola in northeastern Nigeria. So all this hamper our clinical operation. Another way we work around it was to work through their community leaders to come to the clinic instead of us going out. The community leaders come to the clinic, we know their roles, and as a result, we network among the non-governmental organizations to be able to see, how do you assist in Mobi? How do you assist in Michika? How do you assist in all the boundary communities that borders Cameroon and Lake Chad, around Adamawa State in Nigeria, around Maiduguri in Nigeria? These are areas in the northeast, but we had relative peace in the Kano campus. We were able to do much through the effort of some of my colleagues, such as Ibrahim Sule. We're able to also reach out, but there is a limit to which you can reach out within the Nigerian context because of this insurgency. Let me also put it on record that southern Nigeria is relatively safe and okay. But my context in this webinar is this northeastern part of Nigeria, where the Boko Haram reign of terror on a continuous basis. So, and despite all the assurances, we have the challenge up till today. And we will not be able to do much when our students are about writing their exam. As you know, the bar exam is a vocational exam, it's once in a year. So the third term, clinical operation virtually shuts down. But we take advantage of the first and second term. Specific example, like I said before, a case of Salama. Salama was a rape victim. I'm not using a direct name. I'm just using that name in context now. Was a rape victim in IDP and was able to identify the rapist. But before we could know what is happening, the rapist and others have been relocated to another IDP camp. So we couldn't. Now let me stop and welcome questions and remarks from others for me to be able to go forward. I've taken some time before the network logged me out, and I apologize for that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I mean, this is fascinating. It's very, very, very disturbing and sad, obviously. But I think maybe you did give a specific example, but I wanted to see if these students who are, what kind of training. I mean, I guess you guys need a special training to give these students before.
Yes, we do with the aid of network of legal aid institutions. We call it NULAI Nigeria. Okay. Is the foremost legal aid institution in Nigeria in charge of law clinics. In fact, the whole idea of law clinic in Nigeria was brought by this organization, headed by Professor Ernest Ojukwu, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. And they coordinate clinics across universities and law schools all over Nigeria. So from time to time, they come with funding from Makato and other non-governmental organizations. They come around, they train. They train on pedagogy, they train on pretrial detainee, they train on the clinical operations and how to handle situations during armed conflicts. Okay. So this is one major organization. Then we have what you call the Open Society Initiative. They also come around to assist us once in a while. So we have quite a number. Then the Legal Aid, Nigerian Legal Aid Council, they are also interested with the support from the Nigerian Bar Association, which is actually a major institution in Nigeria comprising of all lawyers in the country. So these are some of the NGOs that we partner with, and they have been of help in terms of training. As we enroll the students every session at the beginning, we give them a form to fill, to register in the law clinic, identifying their strengths and potentials. Some would like to go out for street law. Some would like to go to the prisons. Some would like to do in-house training. So that's how we operate, yes.
So this is fascinating. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions in the Q&A session too, in the Q&A part of the session regarding the work also in the prisons and the work in the street law clinic. But let me just give the floor to the third speaker, because what we said is we'll have 3 speakers in a row and then Q&A. We did interject a question because there were connectivity problems with the speakers, so we took advantage of the pause for a question. But let us move to Arshad, who's back with us. He was back with us for a moment there. Arshad, are you here?
That is, I was talking about the Malakand division of Pakistan, and we have the Taliban insurgency in 2007 till 2009. And the particular region was called as Swat, and Malala Yousafzai belonged to that area. Taliban's almost took over almost half of that Malakand region. And what they did, they destroyed all the institutions. Thousands of schools, they were destroyed. Women, they were not allowed to go to the schools. And the institutions like judiciary, like bar, police stations, everything was just destroyed. And Pakistan Army had to take the actions. And unfortunately, for 3 years, they ruled that area, Taliban's. And due to that, the hundreds and thousands of people, they have to migrate to other parts of Pakistan. And the law schools, the legal education, it was affected as well. The universities, they were closed, and there was no education at that time. And since Pakistan is following Islamic law and also common law system, but unfortunately, Taliban regime brought the extremist, hardcore Islamic law, Sharia, and in almost every day in Swat, you could see the hanging in the public, and they were using the FM radio stations to to give the commands like kings. And at that time, the institutions, they were destroyed. Many lawyers, they relocated themselves, the judges and the other professionals. And in 2009, in Pakistan Army took very good action against the Taliban, and they took over again that area. And from 2009 onwards, the Pakistan government, along with the support of many international organizations, worked for the restoration of the peace and justice over there, and also legal education over there. So I was part of many initiatives of the government of Pakistan and many UN organs like UNDP for the strengthening rule of law projects in that particular area. And so I have seen the pre-conflict situation, during conflict situation, and I have worked in the post-conflict situation. And things are not as they were before 2007. So if you have any particular query about my experience, I can share that as well.
Oh, I think that's fascinating. I just wanted to check if you could stay with us. I know maybe your video can't be turned on, but I just wanted to make sure, Arshad, that you'll stay with us for the Q&A, because there's going to be a couple of questions coming in. So just talk, okay, if your video's off. That's great. That's great. Okay, so hang on with us, Arshad. We have a question for Bukola, and I think maybe for Steve as well. And the question is from Rajesh Kumar.
My question is related to the legal thought or the legal education depends on the kind of legal system prevailing in that country. And the legal system prevailing in the particular country might have a kind of differing opinion with the modern values. So in such a situation, what kind of legal education in armed conflict we are looking at? Because, for example, in Afghanistan, the present regime is looking at the Islamic legal education. That is the Sharia legal system. And the modern legal system, which remained in existence for some period of time, that was a kind of system which was copy-pasted from the Western world, which was not having a kind of generic, or we can say that not originated from the Afghan people, and that's why it could not sustain for longer time, because people were not standing with these modern values, so it could not sustain. So the question is how to balance these two kind of thought process, and even in some situations, even the protector of the modern values are found to be in hand in gloves with the conflicting parties.
Bukola,
so those who are,
did you understand the question? Do you want to share a little bit about your views on?
Yes, I would like to say a few things in response to the question. Now, irrespective of the legal system that is operational in a country, every citizen has what we call human rights. And every legal regime protects human rights. So if you look at it from the perspective of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for instance, in Africa, we have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, then the constitution of the country, there is no way it won't protect human rights. And we take it from there. You are trying to protect the rights of this victim of banditry, armed conflict, insurgency, vis-a-vis international humanitarian laws and treaties already signed by these countries. So you take advantage, whether it's Sharia law, Islamic law, the British legal system that is common in the Commonwealth region, you take advantage, then you look for the appropriate institutional framework. In this case, the courts, the non-governmental organization, to assist these victims. So we can work with international bodies vis-a-vis the court system to ensure that we protect victims of insurgency armed conflict, now we can now use the instrument of clinical legal education to make our students via the law clinic to assist this victim using the military, using the government, using international donor agencies, and so on and so forth. That is if I got your question right, and if I'll be able to add some value to what you have said. Thank you.
I think this is great because you see the, Steve, a second, I'll move the floor, I'll give you the floor. I wanted to say this is a great example where you have universal values at play, I would say, Dr. Kumar, to your question. It really isn't a matter of which system of law do you apply, and it's a matter of humanity and common values. Obviously, some of the regimes may try to argue that that's all relative, but we know that's common. And I wanted, Steve wanted to give a word, but first, having Bukola with us, there's something you said about going to the prisons, and I would be interested to hear if your students are also giving legal aid to suspected perpetrators of terrorism in these areas. And if that is the case, is this like a criminal justice type legal aid, defendants' rights, etc.? And it's such a conflict and such emotional, probably charged and trauma in all that area. How does that work? I mean, what kind of tools do they have to do that? Do they want to do that? The students, do they see it as a teachable moment? Or, I mean, how do you cope with that? I mean, helping victims is easier morally speaking, but helping perpetrators, I mean, how do you cope with that?
Is it for Stephen or for myself?
Yeah, it's for you because you said your students have been working in the prisons.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Before the student come, we have what we call the pretrial detainees form. So we take them to these prisons. We already know the prison. We call the Nigerian Correctional Service now, hence CS. So when the student go there, and there is a module, there is a course in the Nigerian law school we call, look at the procedural aspect of prosecution. So when they go to prisons, they look for minor offenses, misdemeanor, and felonies. So when they look at this category, they know they start from access to justice. Where do we start from? Giving them access to justice. And there are, like I said during our technical session at the pre-webinar session, in Nigeria, every legal practitioner that wants to become a senior advocate of Nigeria must render some pro bono service, documented pro bono service. So the students identify these lawyers who are ready to render pro bono services, and they go and get information, data, into the pretrial detainees form with access. At times when we go, we buy sanitary provided by the clinic, provided by the student themselves, sanitary wares and pads or slippers, or just minor things to entice those inmates.
Let me just direct you at the heart of the issue is, I mean, what kind of dilemmas emanate from the conflict situation in connection with the work in prisons? So do they have to work with, the perpetrators of those crimes that the victims of which are in the IDP camps? Or are these other kinds of prisoners that have nothing to do with the conflict? Because I really want to go to the heart of the matter.
Yes, they debrief these terrorists also in the prisons. And once they are sure that there is legal representation, it's no longer the problem of the law clinic. But for those without legal representation, students through what we call the referral clinics, they refer them to practicing lawyers because they are not licensed to practice, who will now come and assist them. If it's a case where they need bail or medical grants, the students arrange for this to be granted bail. But most times the terms are so onerous, the terms are so tough that bail is rarely granted, considering the nature of the crime. But legal representation is a major thing.
Okay.
Legal representation is a major thing for the clinic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Steve, your hand up earlier. If you want to answer the question, you can also refer a question, Steve, to the other speakers of this panel. So this is your opportunity to do that as well. Go ahead.
Yes, I want to thank Rajesh for the question. And I wholly endorse what Bukola said in the answer to that, most contemporary Muslim majority countries do not rely exclusively on Sharia, but they also, in their own constitutions and in terms of international treaties that have been ratified, respected or not all the time, have recognized universal, what we're referring to as universal human rights principles. And despite the claims of them being Western oriented or being colonialist, I think much of the world agrees that as much as we want to appreciate traditional and indigenous legal systems, there's a marriage, and in certain areas we can't make compromises. And the other thing I want to say, whenever I engage with another country in clinical teaching, it's not to teach the law of the nation. It's about working with whatever the legal regime is. But that said, for me, there's an important component to clinical education. That's the social justice component. And when that rubs up against things like an Islamic outlier regime, which most of the Islamic world realizes, among others, that the Sharia, that the Taliban is an outlier Muslim government. And that said, that it's easy to look to examples of where one does not need to sort of capitulate to a particular treatment aspect of human relations and ignore basically the human rights and humanitarian norms that have been accepted by most countries of the world.
Thank you very much. I wanted to give the floor to Arshad to also provide his view on this, and then we'll take a couple more questions. Go ahead, Arshad. Unmute yourself.
Okay. As far as the question is concerned about Afghanistan, if you look at the history, in 1919, they got their first constitution, and that was like transplant. Mr. Kumar was referring the transplant of different legal regime. So it started from 1919, and it was from Turkish and from Austrian legal system. Yes, Afghanistan is traditional society. It believes in traditions mostly and Islamic principles as well. Pakistan has a very good example that how they have blended the Islamic principles with the modern democracy. And like in Afghanistan, we will have to look into the traditional justice as well. And the modern human rights regime can be fit in, but it should be according to their traditions as well. Obviously, not against the women or we cannot compromise on the education of the women and other things. But they, strictly speaking, because I have been traveling to that part of the world, and also I'm working on the other side of Afghanistan. So I understand that how the Pashtun belt is, more concerned about their tradition than Islam, and then the other legal system.
That's fascinating. We have a follow-up question from Shiran. You wanna pose your question maybe to us, one of the specific panelists?
Yes. My question is for Bukola, because I wasn't sure I understood correctly, and I wanted to understand how in your legal system are students allowed to represent in court, or they have to be supervised by the teachers, by the clinical teachers? You have to unmute.
Okay, good. Yes, students are not allowed to practice in Nigeria. And like I said, we use what we call referral clinics. Just like in the primary healthcare system, where a nurse is not able to perform certain clinical operation, you refer it to a surgeon. But our students are helpful in getting information, getting data from the field, through sit law, through betrayal detainee, and looking for lawyers who are pro bono inclined, who render pro bono inclined legal services. And they give this data to them, and they also follow up. And they also go to court on the date for appearance. They remind both the court and the lawyers, and the student representative are also in court, and they follow up, they take notes. As a result, they are also learning the practical aspect of criminal litigation, using the information from the person being tried, that is the terrorist or the accused person, if I may say. Now, they are not allowed to practice, but they are a great resource for coordination of access to justice and legal representation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our host Ido would like to pose a question as well to one or some of the speakers. Go ahead.
Yeah. My question is, because of the topic of the thematic topic of this webinar, which is legal education during armed conflict, there is a question of how you adjust yourself to reality. I mean, does your legal education adjust yourself on a day-to-day basis to the struggles, or are there any plans ahead how to, be ready to the next struggle, to the next conflict, to the next situation that might pose similar struggles to your clinic, to legal education, etc.?
As far as the legal fraternity and the legal education is concerned, as far as the conflict zones are concerned, we are always taking care of the sensitivity of the issues. Like if I'm talking about from my perspective, that I got one assignment to design a module of clinical legal education, which I referred to earlier to the administrators as well. That I designed a module, but I had to refine it according to the needs of that particular area. So if you are like working in that part in the conflict, and obviously the conflicts, if in one regime you are working, so you will have to change accordingly, keeping the sensitivity of the challenges of that particular area or that particular the public.
Arshad, maybe you want to give the example. I mean, when you had to design the curricula from the conflict for students in the conflict area, and it was about a topic which was a little sensitive in that area. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about how you managed to adapt. What was the topic and how you managed to adapt it and still incorporate it in their program?
Yeah. Due to Taliban regime, the democracy, there was no democracy. And when Pakistan restored its writ on that, the women of particular area, they were not allowed to vote. And there was 0% vote of the women. So the module which we prepared, that was for the women participation, and it was street law model, and our female students, they had to give the sessions to the community, to the women, and also so what when I designed the module, I was asked to change it according to Sharia. So I had to at that time, because I had to give the references from Quran and from Sunnah, and because voting is this, and it is obligatory as a Muslim to vote like this. So you will have to change it according to that. So I did it. It was probably in 2016.
So you mean you still managed to develop a module on women's voting rights, and just you found authorities and citations from the Quran and the legal and the religious texts to back it up, and then it passed.
Yeah. That lens was changed from the modern human rights regime to the Islamic principles, and the arguments were given from the Islamic text. So that was passed. Yeah.
The regime wasn't involved enough to see that as a challenge, because I mean.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Went under the radar. All right, that's a really interesting example. I think we have time perhaps for another, either if one of the speakers want to answer the same question or one of the questions that were already raised, we could do that. Steve and Bukola, if you still want to answer one of the questions. Okay, Steve, go ahead. Unmute,
Yeah, I'll just point out, I think Ido's question gets back to the point that Richard made earlier, that there are some, in terms of changing the curriculum, there is obviously a different curriculum that's in place. And although Richard's focus was on the ability of the Sharia faculty to serve as legal aid, as happens in many parts of the world, a legal aid purpose under the current regime, I suppose, whether it's intentional or not, there is a change in the curriculum in a time of, well, again, I'm going to say in the time of extreme conditions or turmoil, because again, as Richard points out, it's true that there is a certain peace that was brought with the arrival of the Taliban, and there was an insecurity in the interim period between the two Taliban regimes So one has to, again, as I say, whether it was intentional or not, there are adjustments that one makes in the curriculum to deal with the current regime, and that's reflected in the laws that are enacted and the law that's taught.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve. We have one last question from the audience, from Joel. I didn't get your last name, so if you can, once you're unmuted, maybe you could let us know your name and last name and turn on the camera as well. Joel? Question from Joel?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon.
You can turn your camera on.
Good afternoon.
Can you turn your camera on?
Okay.
If that's possible.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Can you hear me now? Okay, you can hear me. Yes, I want any of the speakers, I want them to answer this question. This issue of these conflicts all over the world, and especially in Nigeria, they are funded from somewhere. The clinical students today also investigate how these conflicts are being funded. Is it through cryptocurrency? Is it through the Bureau de changes? Is it through the normal channel? Because each time you hear that there's conflict somewhere, the type of sophisticated weapon they use. In fact, some hijack planes, hijack helicopters. So,
Joe, I'm sorry. Is this connected to legal education? Because we're talking about how to deliver.
What I'm saying is that the students on legal clinics, do they investigate how these conflicts are being funded? That's my question. Yes, it's connected because it's maybe what they are doing is like maybe peace building or something like that. But what of the source of this funding too, so that this thing will just end? Because if those people that are causing the conflicts are not funded, then there will be no conflict in the first place. There will be no crisis. There will be no ID camps.
Okay, so because we're running out of time. So basically, are any of the legal education projects that the speakers are involved in at all doing any research on the root causes of conflict and these kind of ideas? Because I'm not sure it's in the area of any of these programs.
Yes, if I may chip in something. May I speak?
Yeah, go ahead. Just to the point.
So, taking it further, we can design a curriculum to cater for this. And this will be one of the thematic areas. How do we resolve it? How do we engage these law clinics to resolve this? Then issues like this will come up, and curriculum development, you make the student to sit down to look at what is the course, what is the module, then what are the pre-class activities? Is this street law? And what do we do in class with this? What is the outcome? What is the course objective? What do we intend to achieve? Floating this program. You know, it's coming in different parts now. Apart from criminal litigation, we have the role of non-governmental organizations and so on and so forth. So it's quite a wide area. And that's why Joel has been able to expand the horizon of what we are talking about. Then apart from that, we can do some form of further research, maybe by way of floating a journal or by way of putting it on at postgraduate level. That's just my take on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And we will hear in the next session after the break, the first speaker will talk about, I would say, aspects of the conflict that spill over into the faculty and into the student body. And then clinical legal education really has a role to play in terms of conflict resolution and looking at root causes. And I think this is a really great way to end while keeping these ideas in the back of our head for the beginning of the next session. And so without further ado, I see we've finished the questions from the audience. We've all had a chance to hear the different perspectives. We will take a 10-minute break. People, you don't have to disconnect. You could just turn off your video and your microphone in order not to have to reconnect afterwards. And in 10 minutes, we'll meet with a session dedicated to the conflict in Israel at the moment with some of our faculty back home from Haifa and Jerusalem talking about Similar issues, obviously, but in a very different context of conflict. And so thank you very much, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you in 10 minutes.